The story, published in a British newspaper, began with the following sentence: heartfelt commiseration to Dorothy Naylor of Plymouth, whose recent day trip to Bridgewater was spoiled when her husband Oliver left her on the forecourt of a garage and drove 17 miles before noticing his wife was not in the car. I couldn't believe he'd gone without me, Miss Naylor told the Western Morning News. I usually sit in the back because I can move around more, but normally we talk to one another. The couple, both in their 70s, had pulled into a garage to change a tire. Mr. Naylor drove off and didn't notice his wife's absence until he arrived in Bridgewater. After stopping in town, he asked his wife, "Where do you want to get out?" When she didn't answer, he turned around to discover that he had left her behind. The paper added that the couple had been married for 40 years. Yeah, have you ever left your wife or kids stranded somewhere? I've been there, done that. Several years ago now, when my children were much smaller, we ventured out on a family outing. I had asked a friend of mine from high school if he knew of some just good family fun ideas around here, and he had suggested rafting the Yakima River in inner tubes, not really rafts, just inner tubes, and floating the river. And I decided that sounded like a great family bonding experience, so we gathered our stuff and our tent, and we went camping down at the KOA in Ellensburg, and it was wonderful. It was about 170 degrees outside, and the mosquitoes were just thick. It was perfect camping weather. And we decided we would float down the river. We got our inner tubes that day, and we scouted some different places, and we settled on a place downriver, a very popular place to launch and then get out of the river further down. And we even brought our little dog. I had my little dog carry-on life jacket. She had a little life jacket that went around her with a little handle on it so we could carry our little lap dog. And she had her own little inflatable raft it was actually a little raft that we gave her. And she stayed in that and didn't try and jump out and get in the water or anything. It was great. We had a great time. Leisurely tubing down the Yakima River. It was a gorgeous night. The water was perfect. Everything was perfect. And I was handily patting myself on the back for what a great dad I was and what a great idea this had been. We got to the end, and it was time to get out, and I told everyone to start paddling towards the shore so that we could hit our out point. And I didn't really realize at that point how strong the current was and how fast the river was moving. It was July after all, and so we didn't quite make it to our destination. And about halfway across the river, I realized we weren't going to make it, and I told all my kids and my wife to bail out of their inner tubes and begin to swim as hard as they could towards the shore, dragging their tubes and whatever possessions they had with them to the shore. And we made it to shore. We just didn't make it to the drop-off point. And so there was really no way to get out of the river from where we ended up on the shoreline. We were lucky enough just to be able to grab some brush and be able to just hold on against the current and not be swept away. And there we were kind of strung along the bank, and the last person along the bank was my daughter Grace, my middle daughter Grace, who was about, she was probably about 10 or 11 at the time, and as she was kind of trying to make her way from her inner tube onto the shore and hold on, she was being carried away by the current, and she said, "Hey, everybody, look at me. I'm the Titanic," as she began slowly drifting down the river, and we panicked a little bit, and told her to grab a hold of whatever she could grab a hold of and to stop moving and to take us seriously because we were in serious danger. And luckily for us, a group of athletes from Central Washington University, their lacrosse team, was there, and they had seen how we were getting out and realized we were in a predicament and came running down the beach to help us. And so one of them came and dove in and grabbed my daughter and took her to safety, and then the others helped my wife and my other daughter get out. And then finally they came back for my son and I, who I was just holding on to him because he couldn't really touch the bottom without the current taking his feet away. And so I was just trying to keep him from drifting down the river, and we were able to, with some help, get out of the river. And there was kind of this somberness when we got out, because I think everybody realized just how close we'd come to having a real problem, a real life and death situation, and how luckily we were to be rescued. My great idea didn't really work out to be such a great idea after all, and it totally backfired on me. So we piled into the car, all of us just relieved to be alive at that point. And we made our way back to where we dropped our first car off so that my wife and girls could take that car and we could all caravan back to the campground together. And in my excitement and haste to be back on solid ground and on dry land and to have that experience over with, we let the girls out, and they made their way down to the car, and Aiden and I took off in the expedition and headed back to the campground. We were in a little canyon, and you didn't really get cell service in the canyon, so we didn't have our cell phones with me. And as I came out of the canyon, my cell phone began to light up. And as I got back to the campground, I stopped and checked my messages, and there were many messages from my wife, basically saying, "You've stranded us. You have the car keys." So luckily for us, my daughter had her phone with her still, and and through all the rafting and everything, she'd taken her phone with her, and we were able to get her phone out of the car with it because it was unlocked, and she was able to make that phone call. And I immediately felt horrible. I had abandoned my wife and my daughters after nearly drowning them in the river, and I had these deep regrets. So I raced back, picked them up. And while I was there and I'm going back to the campground, made some phone calls and got a hotel room for them, and drove them to their hotel room in caravan this time, and dropped them off with some snacks and drinks, and left them in their hotel. And my son and I went back to rough it in the campground. Needless to say, I learned a lot about forgiveness that day, and I learned a lot more even about prayer that day. I learned how real faith gets when desperation sinks in. And I learned that God provides in unexpected ways. You see, it's safe to say that things didn't really work out the way that I envisioned them working out. But God still provided, just in a way that I didn't plan on. Let's take a look at our text today, shall we? John chapter 2, starting with verse 1, says this. The next day there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festivities, so Jesus' mother told him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, that's not our problem," Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." But his mother told the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told the servants, "Fill the jars with water." When the jars had been filled, he said, "Now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies." So the servants followed his instructions. When the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, though of course the servants knew, he called the bridegroom over. "A host always serves the best wine first," he said. "Then, when everyone has had a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine, but you have kept the best wine until now." This miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After the wedding, he went to Capernaum for a few days with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples. All right, what are we to make of this strange passage of Scripture? Well, weddings in ancient Israel were a multi-day affair, often lasting a week. And at Cana, by best guesstimates, as far as where it was then and where it would be located today, was about 9 miles from Nazareth, Jesus' hometown. And John points to this as the first sign that Jesus gives us of who he is and what he's come to do. They're hidden throughout the gospel and reveals Jesus' mission and purpose. John's going to point out this is a sign. He's going to point out a few more chapters, another sign from Jesus, and then really we're kind of on our own. It's like a treasure hunt after that, to try and identify the things that Jesus did that tell us about who Jesus was and what he came to do. So what do we first What are we to make of this first miracle that Jesus does, being the first sign that John points to? What does this sign tell us about Jesus? Well, we know John says earlier in chapter 1 that Jesus came full of grace and truth. But he was also filled with compassion. Here Jesus steps in and asks his mother, "Why is this our problem? My time has not yet come." You see, it was a huge societal faux pas to run out of wine midway through the wedding ceremony, one that would haunt the wedding party for years and years to come. They would have been always forever known as the family that ran out of wine at the wedding. That would have been the omen that this new marriage and this new couple were married under. And it would have stuck with them all of their days. It would have been a social stigma that they had with them all of their days. It's how they would have been known. So there's incredible social embarrassment attached with running out of wine. But it doesn't really answer the question when Jesus steps in and asks his mother, "Why is this our problem?" John says this is a sign, but a sign that points towards what? That Jesus can take the plain, everyday things of this world and use them to do something exquisite, something marvelous. He starts his ministry by transforming 6 ordinary ceremonial cleansing water jars into jars of premium wine. He will go on to transform a ragtag group of men into the beginnings of the church, and through their ministry, transform the lives of all he touched. Notice that Jesus doesn't try to beg off this miracle. I mean, he kind of does, but not really. He's not forceful about it. He just tells his mom, my time hasn't come yet, Mom. What do you want me to do? Which kind of begs the question, what did Mary think? This is Jesus' first miracle, John says. So what did Mary think he was going to do? Did he do this in public, in private, at home? Did he make wine for them at home just by turning water into wine for his family? Had she seen him do this before? What would give her the confidence? What would give her the chutzpah to impose this on her son? Because it's not their problem. They're merely guests at the wedding. So why is Mary confident that Jesus can do something even after he says it's not their problem? I believe that the reason she asked him is because Mary knew Jesus. She knew who he was, and she knew that his time had come, and so she takes matters into her own hands. In his autobiography, Buck O'Neill tells of being a black man who played professional baseball before African Americans were allowed to play in the all-white major leagues. By the time the color barrier was broken in 1947, O'Neill was considered too old to play in the big leagues, as were most of his teammates. Many of his friends grew bitter about their missed opportunities. O'Neill writes, "At a reunion of Negro League players in Ashland, Kentucky, a reporter from Sports Illustrated asked me if I had any regrets, coming along as I did before Jackie Robinson integrated the major leagues. And this is what I told him then. Waste no tears for me. I didn't come along too early. I was right on time. I don't have a bitter story. I truly believe I have been blessed." The title of O'Neill's book reflects his cheerful optimism and his belief in the sovereignty of God. Despite missing fame and fortune, O'Neill chose to title his autobiography, "I Was Right on Time." I love what Jesus does here. He's made it clear that it's not his time. He's just called his disciples, and I'm sure he thinks they need a bit more seasoning. And doing the miraculous was going to get the news out pretty quickly that there was a prophet in town. After 400 years of God being silent, a real prophet is on the scene, miracles and all. I also like this. Notice there's no grand flourish. Jesus isn't a magician with tricks. He doesn't call the crowd over or make a big deal out of what he's doing. In fact, the bride and groom don't even know where the wine came from or what's going on. They just know that the bacon has been saved, so to speak. He's just the creator with a wine problem to solve. Do you know that he does the same with us? He takes us cracked, worn, and sometimes leaky vessels, and he uses us to hold the beautiful wine that he has made. The wine of Jesus is his grace and mercy, where we should expect guilt and the law of God. When I was a young pastor just starting out in ministry, I pastored a little church in Gresham, Oregon. And I had a wonderful mentor there by the name of Wes Dodge. And he was the pastor there when I was the youth pastor, and then he retired, and the church asked if I would take over the senior pastorate. And so we kind of worked through all those hoops, and we did that. And very early on in my ministry, we had a little crisis within the church, and this was in 1996. So times were a little different then. But one of the girls in the youth group got pregnant with another boy in the youth group. And this was a big brouhaha. Some people in the church wanted to give Cassie a baby shower. Other people in the church thought that if they gave Cassie a baby shower, that it would be condoning her behavior and condoning what had happened. And I was 25 years old, and I didn't really know what to do. I knew the difference between right and wrong, but I didn't know what to do in this situation because it seemed like whatever I did, somebody was going to be upset and people were going to be hurt and angry. So I went to Wes and I asked him, Wes, what would you do if you were me? And he was he was the best mentor in the world, but he hated giving advice. Hated giving advice. And when I put him on the spot, he kind of groaned and hemmed and hawed, and finally he said, Brian, you know what? He said, if I've learned one thing in ministry, over 40 years of ministry, it's this: to err on the side of grace. That when we're stuck with a tough decision, when we're faced with a difficult prospect, and we don't know what to do, I think we should err on the side of grace. He said, it's your call what you decide to do, and there's no right or wrong answer to this. But he said, that's just what I've learned. And so we had the baby shower. I erred on the side of grace. And hopefully that young girl knew that her church family loved her and cared for her and her little baby girl. Jesus redeems us, the cracked and chipped vessels, and despite ourselves, he uses us to make something beautiful in the lives of others. It isn't that we're so great, but God makes us great by his very love. By his grace, he transforms us into priceless treasures. Brian Chappell tells a story about learning to use a crosscut saw with his father. As Brian and his father were sawing through a log that had a rotten core, a piece of wood sheared off that looked just like a horse's head. So Brian took it home and then later gave it to his dad as a present. Chappell continues. He says, I attached a length of 2x4 board to that log head, attached a rope tail, and stuck on some sticks to act as legs. Then I halfway hammered in a dozen or so nails down the 2x4 body of that horse, wrapped the whole thing in butcher block paper, put a bow on it, and presented it to my father. When he took off the wrapping, he smiled and said, thank you, it's wonderful. What is it? It's a tie rack, Dad, I said. See, you can put your ties on those nails going down the side of the horse's body. My father smiled again and thanked me. Then he leaned the horse against his closet wall because the stick legs couldn't keep it standing upright. And for years, he used it as a tie rack. Now, when I first gave my father that rotten log horse head tie rack, I really thought it was good. In my childish mind, this creation was a work of art ready for the Metropolitan Museum. But as I matured, I realized that my work was not nearly as good as I had once thought. In fact, I understood ultimately that my father had received and used my gift not because of its goodness, but out of his goodness. In a similar way, our Heavenly Father receives our gifts not so much because they deserve his love, but because he is love. John continues in the chapter. He says in verse 13, it was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and the cattle, scattered the money changers' coins over the floor, and turned over their tables. Then going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace. Then his disciples remembered his prophecy from the scriptures. Passion for God's house will consume me. But the Jewish leaders demanded, what are you doing? If God gave you the authority to do this, show us a miraculous sign to prove it. All right, Jesus replied, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. What? They exclaimed. It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you can rebuild it in 3 days? But when Jesus said this temple, he meant his own body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered he had said this, and they believed both the scriptures and what Jesus had said. Can you imagine the mayhem? Animals running amok, Jesus flinging over tables and money changers scrambling after their coins. If Jesus was trying to keep a low profile, this isn't the way to go about doing it. When he told Mary his time hadn't yet come, and she basically said, yes, it has, this was what the beginning of Jesus' ministry looked like. He reiterates that the temple is a place of holy love, that it's a place where heaven meets earth. It isn't a business empire, which is what it had become, but a place of worship and clear-sightedness. Both the water turned to wine and the overturning of the temple, acts of signs of who Jesus was and what he was all about. Jesus, full of compassion, willing to start his ministry early to keep mom happy and to avoid a public scandal for the bridegroom's family, is the same Jesus who clears the temple and risks arrest for disorderly conduct simply because he's setting himself up against what the temple and the Jewish religion had become. A shadow of its former self. Jesus, John points out, was full of grace and truth. I wonder, are we? Are we full of grace and truth? In his book, The Kingdom of God is a Party, Tony Campolo relates an experience he had late one night in Hawaii. He says, up a side street, I found a little place that was still open. I went in, took a seat on one of the stools at the counter, and waited to be served. This was one of those sleazy places that deserves the name Greasy Spoon. I did not even touch the menu. I was afraid that if I opened the thing, something gruesome would crawl out. But it was the only place I could find. The fat guy behind the counter came over and asked me, what do you want? I said I wanted a cup of coffee and a donut. He poured a cup of coffee, wiped his grimy hand on his smudged apron, and then grabbed a donut off the shelf behind him. I'm a realist. I know that in the back room of that restaurant, donuts are probably dropped on the floor and kicked around. But when everything is out front where I could see it, I really would have appreciated if he'd used a pair of tongs and placed the donut on some wax paper. As I sat there munching on my donut and sipping my coffee at 3:30 in the morning, the door of the diner suddenly swung open, and to my discomfort, in marched 8 or 9 provocative and boisterous prostitutes. It was a small place, and they sat on either side of me. Their talk was loud and crude. I felt completely out of place and was just about to make my getaway when I overheard the woman beside me say, tomorrow's my birthday. I'm going to be 39. Her friend responded in a nasty tone. So what do you want from me, a birthday party? What do you want? You want me to go get a cake and sing happy birthday? Come on, said the woman sitting next to me. Why do you have to be so mean? I was just telling you, that's all. Why do you have to put me down? I was just telling you it's my birthday. I don't want anything from you. I mean, why should you give me a birthday party? I've never had a birthday party in my whole life. Why should I have one now? When I heard that, I made a decision. I sat and waited until the women had left. Then I called over the fat guy behind the counter and I asked him, do they come in here every night? Yeah, he answered. The one right next to me, does she come in here every night? Yeah, he said, that's Agnes. Yeah, she comes in here every night. Why? What do you want to know? Because I heard her say that tomorrow was her birthday, I told him. What do you say you and I do something about that? What do you think about us throwing a birthday party for her right here tomorrow night? A cute smile slowly crossed his chubby cheeks and he answered with measured delight. That's great. I like it. That's a great idea. Calling to his wife who did the cooking in the back room, he shouted, hey, come out here. This guy's got a great idea. Tomorrow's Agnes's birthday. This guy wants us to go in with him and throw a birthday party for her right here tomorrow night. Look, I told him, if it's okay with you, I'll get back here tomorrow morning about 2:30 and decorate the place. I'll even get a birthday cake. No way, said Harry. That was his name. The birthday cake's my thing. I'll make the cake. At 2:30 the next morning, I was back at the diner. I picked up some crepe paper decorations at the store and made a sign out of big pieces of cardboard that read, "Happy Birthday, Agnes." I decorated the diner from one end to the other. I had that diner looking good. The woman who did the cooking must have gotten the word out on the street because by 3:15, every prostitute in Honolulu was in the place. It was wall-to-wall prostitutes and me. At 3:30 on the dot, the door of the diner swung open and in came Agnes and her friend. I had everybody ready. After all, I was kind of the MC of the affair. And when they all came in, we all screamed, "Happy birthday!" Never have I seen a person so flabbergasted, so stunned, so shaken. Her mouth fell open. Her legs seemed to buckle a bit. Her friend grabbed her arm to steady her. As she was led to sit on one of the stools along the counter, we all sang "Happy Birthday" to her. As we came to the end of our singing with "Happy birthday, dear Agnes, happy birthday to you," her eyes moistened. Then when the birthday cake with all the candles on it was carried out, she lost it and just completely cried. Harry gruffly mumbled, "Blow out the candles, Agnes. Come on, blow out the candles. If you don't blow out the candles, I'm going to have to blow out the candles." And after an endless few seconds, he did. Then he handed her a knife and told her, "Cut the cake, Agnes. Yo, Agnes, we all want some cake." Agnes looked down at the cake. Then without taking her eyes off of it, she slowly and softly said, "Look, Harry, is it all right with you if is it okay if I what I want to ask you is it okay if I keep the cake a little while? Is it all right if we don't eat it right away?" Harry shrugged and answered, "Sure, it's okay. If you want to keep the cake, keep the cake. Take it home if you want to." "Can I?" she asked. Then looking at me, she said, "I just live down the street a couple of doors. I want to take the cake home, okay? I'll be right back, honest." She got off the stool, picked up the cake, and carrying it like it was the Holy Grail, walked slowly towards the door. As we all just stood there, motionless, she left. When the door closed, there was a stunned silence in the place. Not knowing what else to do, I broke the silence by saying, "What do you say we pray?" Looking back on it now, it seems more than strange for a sociologist to be leading a prayer meeting with a bunch of prostitutes in a diner in Honolulu at 3:30 in the morning. But then it just felt like the right thing to do. I prayed for Agnes. I prayed for her salvation. I prayed that her life would be changed and that God would be good to her. When I finished, Harry leaned over the counter and with a trace of hostility in his voice, he said, "Hey, you never told me you were a preacher. What kind of church do you belong to?" In one of those moments when just the right words came, I answered, "I belong to a church that throws birthday parties for whores at 3:30 in the morning." Harry waited a moment and then almost sneered as he answered, "No, you don't. There's no church like that. If there was, I'd join it. I'd join a church like that." Wouldn't we all? Wouldn't we all like to join a church that throws birthday parties for whores at 3:30 in the morning? Well, that's the kind of church that Jesus Christ came to create. Amen? Have a wonderful Lord's Day. I love you. Take care.